Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old 4th Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
Thank you for listening, whether it's on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, on demand at ProgressiveVoices.com, or via podcast. For a show note, I'll tell you, yesterday we did not do a show until the afternoon, so if you missed that on America One Radio, I apologize. Gave myself a little bit of grace, slept in, got a little work done. It is a busy real estate season, by the way. Even with housing prices being what they are, and the debate as to whether or not renting or owning a home is the right thing right now. And listen, that's an actual and honest debate. There was a New York Times editorial piece over the weekend, and if I have some time today, I may dive into that. But what I really want to dive into are crosstabs. Ooh, exciting stuff. Yeah, I know, you're salivating at the thought, right? New York Times Siena poll showing that President Joe Biden trailing former president, the man in the courtroom falling asleep at his election interference case in Manhattan, Donald Trump. Joe Biden, the president, trailing Trump in 5 of 6 polls, according to it's swing state polls, according to the New York Times and Siena College's most recent poll. So the Georgia crosstabs. Let's dive into that. And I'm thankful that the New York Times split them up by states. Obviously, that gives us an opportunity to be hyper-local here. We have these results, the crosstabs of a poll that the New York Times and Siena College did from April 28th to May 9th. All right. Let's see. How satisfied are you with the way things are going in your life these days? I mean, that's not a political question necessarily. That is just so how are you doing? 36% say very satisfied. 38% say somewhat satisfied. 74% there. 74% are happy with their personal life. Y'all, I think that's pretty interesting, honestly. When you divide that by race, it's 72% amongst white voters. These are registered voters, by the way. And 79% are satisfied, somewhat or very satisfied with their life amongst African Americans. I just want to see if there's anything more to glean from that. Yeah, I mean, that's a net satisfaction overall of 74%. Why do I harp on this? Why do I gloat on this? Well, first of all, it's the first question in the crosstabs. But no, I think this is important to point out. There's so much going on in the world that it's easy to, I mean, my gosh, you can watch the nightly news, right? And just the first 15 minutes will have you breathless and depressed about everything that's going on in the world. We've got 2 conflicts taking place, the Israel-Gaza conflict, the Russia-Ukraine conflict, both of those war scenes and the destruction and the death and the calamity, and you add in climate change, you add in the immigration crisis, you add in inflation, and we've been worrying about the economy now for going on 5 years. And yet, when simply asked by pollsters, how satisfied are you with the way things are going in your life these days? 74% of those polled said very satisfied or somewhat satisfied. Next question. Let's get to the politics. Thinking ahead to the presidential general election, are you almost certain that you will vote, very likely to vote, somewhat likely to vote, not very likely to vote, or not at all likely to vote? Basically, are you going to vote in the presidential election? 40% said almost certain. This is Georgia, by the way. 37% said very likely. 9% said somewhat likely. So that's 86% of those polled. 86% of registered voters, which is why yesterday I talked about drilling in on likely voters when looking at polling data. And that's why the Biden administration is not as concerned as the rest of us are about the results of these polls, which, by the way, just swing wildly from month to month as to who is pulling ahead in the 5 or 6 swing states that are going to determine who wins the presidential election. Okay, so 86% of those in the state of Georgia said that they are either somewhat likely to very likely to almost certain to vote in the upcoming election. Next one, if the 2024 presidential election were held today, who would you vote for if the candidate were Joe Biden, the Democrat? 31%. 39% for Donald Trump. 9% for RFK Jr. Oh, boy. Who else are we getting here? Jill Stein gets 1%. Lars Mapstead, Libertarian candidate. Let's see. We've got another candidate, 2%. That's just not going to vote, wouldn't vote if those were the choices. 5%. 12% said, I don't know, or refused to answer. 17% of those polled in the state of Georgia said either not going to vote or refuse to answer, don't have an idea. Is that room for a incumbent president to make the case? I mean, maybe. Is that 17% among those? Are those folks willing to say if, I don't know, a conviction were to come down, well, we can't vote for the conflict. We're going to have to rally the troops and protect our democracy. 17% though, that's not a small number. When you add in another candidate, that's 19. You add in Lars Mapstead, and the Lars Mapstead, the Libertarian and the Jill Stein folks, I don't get them. I don't see them changing their mind. But when you add them all in, you've got 11% for RFK, Jill Stein, or Lars Mapstead, and then you have another 19% either not going to vote, some other unnamed candidate. That's not a small number, y'all. That's 30% of registered voters in the state of Georgia who say they don't wish to vote for either Donald Trump or President Joe Biden. And I'm just going to go ahead and opine that of that 30%, Joe Biden has, I believe, the better opportunity to win some of those voters over. The RFK factor being the outlier. I mean, when 9 of that 30% has decided that RFK Jr. is their guy, then you're probably only looking at 21% that can be malleable or molded or coerced into voting for a candidate. And I still would say of that 21%, the incumbent president probably has the stronger likelihood of winning some of those folks over. But he trails 39 to 31 otherwise. So he's got some work to do. Next question. Are you definitely or probably going to vote for candidate selected in previous question? 70% said that they're definitely going to vote for who they said they were going to vote for. 26% said probably. 4%, don't know. Next question. If you had to decide between the two today, who would you lean more towards? This is where you get the 49-39, with 12% who said that they don't know. When you look at demographics, let's see, 52% are aged 45 or older, so it leans a little older. When it looks at highest educational level you've accomplished, 14% grad or professional degree, 21% bachelor's degree, 9% associate's degree, so you're looking at 44% with a degree. At another 17% with some college, I'm among those, 61% of those polled have attended some form of college. Throw in a vocational trade school, and that adds another 6% to that. So 67% with post-secondary schooling. 52% of those polled were white, 29% black or African American. Where that is concerning, honestly, is that when you look at the 2020 census, Georgia is 62% white, 12.4% black, Hispanic at 18.7%. Hispanics seem to be underrepresented in this, with only 7% weighing in. Next question, do you consider yourself a Democrat, Republican, an independent, or a member of another party? Look at this. Democrats, 30%. Independent, 31%. Republican, 28%. I'm telling you, it's a purple state. believe independents tend to be a little. I think the independent number is pretty interesting here. So you go to by race, by the way, 45% of white respondents Republican, 33% independent, only 13% Democrat. Amongst African Americans, Democrats 64%, 2% Republican, 33% independent. That's pretty interesting. Who did you vote for in the 2020 presidential election between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, or did you not vote? 39% said that they voted for Joe Biden, 35% for Donald Trump, and 21% said that they did not vote. That's pretty interesting as well. Amongst racial demographics, 74% of black voters in the poll voted for Joe Biden. 21% said that they did not vote. 54% of white voters said that they voted for Donald Trump, 21% for Joe Biden. When you take away the I did not vote crowd, that breaks down to 49% for Joe Biden, 44% for Donald Trump, 3% for somebody else. That's pretty close, pretty accurate to the 2020 results there as well. Next question. Would you say there's some chance you will support Joe Biden or not really any chance? Here you go. Amongst registered voters. Not really any chance. 51%. You had 4% that said, I don't know, or just didn't answer. 6% said that there's some chance. 39% said that they were previously going to vote for Joe Biden. That's only 49% for Joe Biden. 51% of those polled said that there's not really any chance. 6 months out, the incumbent president in the state of Georgia, with more staffers on the ground in the state of Georgia than his opponent, has a lot of work to do, has some ground to make up here in the state of Georgia when he can't get above 49% even to consider voting for him this coming November. Okay, so there's more in the crosstabs to dive into, and you know me, I'm a little wonky about this sort of stuff, so I will do it. What do we have to look forward to when we come back and discuss this? The main reason you're planning to vote for the candidate you vote for. Okay, that's a long list. Mostly voting for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. or against the other candidates. That's pretty interesting. All right, so we got some meaty stuff to dive into when we come back and dive into the crosstabs from the New York Times Siena poll. And actually, is this even a poll worth paying much attention to? There's some speculation that the weight and the disproportionality of returns are just something to shrug off. Polling has been really wild since 2016, right? So we'll have a little discussion about that as well. When the Ron Show returns here on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, on demand at ProgressiveVoices.com, or wherever you podcast. Always giving you the show notes at RonShowATL.com for each episode, by the way. And it's kind of a painstaking thing. I keep all these tabs open, and then at the end of the show, I have to race through and look at the tabs. Which one was that? And obviously today, going through the crosstabs of the New York Times Siena College poll, focusing in on what the Georgia crosstabs are. You'll get that, again, in today's show notes at RonShowATL.com. So we're going through the results here from the state of Georgia. The next question we came to was, what is the main reason you're planning to vote for the candidate you selected? I'd really love to see how this broke down by candidate. Will we get to that later, maybe? I don't know. Let's see. The main reason you're voting for the candidate you selected. The number one reason cited. A positive view of the candidate's policies. The number two reason. That was 26%, by the way. 22% said that it's the negative view of the opponent's character or competence. That's where we are, America. The number two reason folks are deciding to vote for the candidate that they chose, the number two reason is because they have a negative view of the opponent's character and or confidence. Let's see, coming in third, a positive view of the candidate's character or competence. So when you add up the positive view of the candidate's policies and character and confidence, you still only get 44%. 44%, that's what drives most Georgia voters. A positive view of the candidate's policies and a positive view of the candidate's character and competence. The next thing I see is the economy, 12%. So when it drills down to issues, the economy, including jobs and the stock market, would come in first, away from candidate quality, character, competence policies. 12% say the economy. It's the economy, stupid. Remember, though, we said at the top, 74% here in Georgia said, man, they're pretty happy with their life personally. The next issue that comes up, well, it looks like other and don't know, 5 and 4%. Abortion. Is that less than 0.5%? That's how far we are now from the Dobbs decision. Less than 0.5% of Georgians polled. And that's distressing for Democratic candidates, right? John Barrow, running for the Georgia Supreme Court, is making women's choice the central issue. And maybe that's just the thing that Democrats need. Democrats need a candidate that's going to make that a central issue. Unfortunately, John Barrow is not on the ballot in November. He's on the ballot in May. Less than 0.5%. Immigration, 2%. The state of democracy or corruption, less than 1%. Do I see anything here about Israel Hamas? No? Okay, so the RFK question, are you voting for RFK Jr. or against the other two candidates? 54% said that they're definitely voting for RFK Jr. because of RFK Jr. 41% said, no, it's just that we don't like the other two. That's a healthy chunk. In general, how satisfied are you with your choice of candidates in this fall's presidential election? 24% very satisfied. 35% somewhat satisfied. So 59% of those polled, irrespective of party, said that they're either somewhat or very satisfied of their candidates atop their party's ticket. That is a net satisfied of 59%, a 39% unsatisfied, which I still think is a healthy number. As far as who pays attention, how often do you pay attention to what's going on in government and politics? 32% always, 29% most of the time. I happen to think most people, when asked, think more highly of how well they pay attention to current affairs than they actually do. Do you approve or disapprove of the way of Joe Biden is handling his job as president? Remember, these are Georgia crosstab, Georgia voters here. Strongly approve, 13%, somewhat approve, 20%. That is only a 33% net approval, 61% disapprove of the way Joe Biden is handling the presidency of the United States. He has staffers on the ground. Democratic Party has staffers on the ground here in the state of Georgia. They have some work to do. Donald Trump's favorability, very favorable, 26%. Somewhat favorable, 28%. So that's 46%. Think of him in some favorable manner. Well, I think they rounded it up here. The New York Times did 47%, 49% unfavorable. Joe Biden's net favorable, 37%. Unfavorable, 60%. That's an 11% gulf in unfavorable between Donald Trump, the man who presided over the pandemic and the economic calamity, Charlottesville, stand down, stand by. That Donald Trump, the guy in a courtroom right now falling asleep in a diaper. And we're learning more and more about how he coerced the payoff of a porn star to keep quiet about an affair. That guy has a lower unfavorable number than the current president of the United States. Whew. Okay, there were some questions about RFK and Joe Rogan. What one issue is most important in deciding your vote this November? Leading the pack, the economy, 22%. Inflation, the cost of living, 6%. You could really throw those two together, 28% inflation in the economy. Abortion, 7%. That's it, 7%. Immigration, 11%. Again, this is number one issue, so I guess I shouldn't read too much into the paltry numbers for abortion being the central issue. We said immigration, 11%. Healthcare, 2%. Foreign policy, 4%. Climate change, 1%. The state of democracy, corruption, et cetera, and so on, 4%, 2% equality or inequality, 3% dislike of the opposing candidate, and the character and competence, 7%. Here's where some of the disconnect comes in. Remember, we said 74% of Georgians said that they're pretty happy with their life. Thinking about the nation's economy, how would you rate economic conditions today? Excellent, good, or only fair? You got 3, 17, 26%. Only fair. So that is only 46% who think that the economy's either fair, good, or excellent. Poor, 53%. Wage growth is outpacing inflation for the last year. Unemployment remains below 4%. And yet, when you ask Georgia voters, hey, how's the economy going? 53% said poorly. 74% said that their life's going pretty good right now. 53% said the nation's economy is going poorly. There is a disconnect. But there are also some reasons to pay attention to what American voters are saying about the economy. Got more to dive in when the Ron Show returns. The America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, on demand at ProgressiveVoices.com, or wherever you podcast.
This is The Ron Show on America One Radio.
So I've been spending all morning just geeking out over polling data, looking specifically at the Georgia crosstabs here from the New York Times Siena College polling. And if this stuff bores you, I apologize. And by the way, I'll include the link in the show notes at ronshowatl.com. You can look at individual states, the swing states anyway, and then you can look at the overarching data. We were talking about satisfaction, dissatisfaction with the economy, and stopped at this point. Again, from the jump, 74% of those in Georgia said that their life's going pretty good right now. Pretty good to really good. 74%. They're happy with their life. 53%, however, think the economy is in the tank. 53% said poorly. When you add up the only fair to poor, that's 78%. That is... And I don't want to be dismissive or say, well, people are just, consumed by media narrative or punditry, or I get it. You're talking to a 50-year-old real estate agent who has a roommate. I mean, I've had to go through the divorce part, and it takes two incomes to live anymore, in a somewhat comfortable existence in this country. So I can't really apply my circumstance, but I do know that, there are folks who have a job and side hustle or side hustles to make ends meet. People are, the gig economy is a real thing. When I see the unemployment numbers, I automatically go, okay, yeah, but what about those who are doing the gig work who aren't even showing up in the data? And by the way, as a real estate agent, I don't think I show up in anything because I'm an independent employee, Yeah, I work for myself essentially. So having done so now for years, I think I've just pretty much fallen off the grid. What I do doesn't apply. The folks who drive rideshare, if that's what they do for their employment, they're long off the radar. They don't fall under any strata and under any data there. No, I mean, I fully understand that there are those who may see the economy and go, ugh, it's been tough sledding. And that cannot be dismissed. We talked a little bit about how, and maybe it'll show up here in the Georgia crosstabs too, how a large majority, 70% of young voters want to see some revolutionary change to our political and economic circumstance in this country. And I spouted out some of the reasons, some of the things that the transcendent candidate, who we don't have, could be touting. And we'll have to wait till 2026 to start hearing that from somebody, maybe. Hopefully somebody that's paying attention and waiting in the wings and ready to save us from our malaise and our despair. Uncapping the House, tying the number of Supreme Court justices to the number of U.S. circuits so that we have a minimum of 12, maybe with a 13th deciding swing vote from the Chief Justice, right? You uncap the House. That deals with the Electoral College disparities that we've been victimized by since twice, just since the dawn of this century, 2016. That also dealt us the hand that we have with a wildly conservative Supreme Court in a country that is a very slim majority liberal when it votes by popular vote. Dealing with economic issues, pay, the wage disparities, tying the minimum wage to an inflationary measure, raising it and then tying it to an inflationary measure so it never loses pace with the cost of living again. Incentivizing CEO to average worker pay to be at a certain number, make it 200 to 1, 250, 100, I mean, whatever that number needs to be. Incentivizing businesses to keep it that way so that as a CEO's pay goes up, so does the average worker, or the CEO's pay stays where it is. There are a lot of things that I think are wildly popular that transcend a candidate that we do not have on the ticket this November could be talking about. And younger voters are thirsting for it. They want some sort of revolutionary change. All right, so I'm going to dive back into some of the polling crosstabs here, and we'll probably come down to that question again. I apologize if that's the case. I'm just literally scrolling through this and reading as I go. Do you think abortion should always be legal, mostly illegal, or always legal? This is Georgia now. And you have 55% who believe that it should be mostly or always legal. But only 0.5% of those who were polled even think that that is the most important issue this election cycle. 55% of Georgia registered voters said mostly or always legal. That's pretty fascinating. In a state that has laws that have made Georgia a state that folks have to flee to terminate a pregnancy after 6 weeks. And in most cases, women don't even know they're pregnant until after 6 weeks. Regardless of how you might vote, tell me whether you trust Joe Biden or Donald Trump to do a better job on each of the following. And liberals, progressives, this is going to be tough to hear some of this. The economy. They trust Donald Trump more. 58% trust Donald Trump more with the economy that he crashed. The economy that actually, while he was president, even before the pandemic, was slowing. The first 3 years of Donald Trump's presidency trailed the last 3 years of Barack Obama's and Vice President Joe Biden's economy. Georgia voters see it differently by a 58 to 34% margin. Regardless of how you might vote, do you trust Joe Biden or Donald Trump to do a better job on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? 47% Donald Trump, 37% Joe Biden. All right, so there's also the 15% who either refuse to answer or don't know. I happen to think a lot of those are probably center-left folks who are just unhappy with the pro-Israeli position, mostly pro-Israeli position that Joe Biden has taken since October 7th, 2023. When it comes to abortion, even here, Joe Biden only gets a 41% nod. Could that be because the Dobbs decision happened under his watch and he's been unable to do anything about that since? I mean, I think that's an unfair calculation to make, but whatever. Let's see. Who do you think most responsible for the Supreme Court ending the constitutional right to an abortion? Joe Biden or Donald Trump? Biden gets 18% some or a lot of responsibility. Donald Trump gets a lot or some responsibility from 50%. Only 50%. The man who placed 3 Supreme Court justices on the bench who, under oath, told Senate subcommittees that established law would take precedent, and then, once on the bench, proved that they perjured themselves. Donald Trump only gets 50% of some or all of the responsibility for the ending of the constitutional right to abortion. Democrats, Biden-Harris 2024, y'all have some work to do here. Which comes closest to your view about the political and economic system in America, even if none are exactly right? All right, here. The system does not need changes. Only 1% of those polled in the state of Georgia believes that the system does not need changes. Minor changes, 23%. Major changes, 58% of all voters. And I could sit here and go down the demographics. It's stronger amongst black voters. It's pretty strong amongst those with a higher college education. It's even at 49% amongst white college-educated voters. 64% here in DeKalb and Fulton County. The system needs to be torn down completely. When you add that, torn down completely in major changes, 16% and 58%. 74% of those polled in the state of Georgia believe that the system needs major changes or that the system needs to be torn down completely. Wow. There's that revolutionary clarion call that neither party nor either candidate are speaking to. Next question. If Donald Trump won the election, do you think nothing would change? There would be minor changes to how things work. There would be major changes to how things work, or he would tear down the system completely. 46% major change, 23% tear down the system completely. These are folks who believe that if Donald Trump won the election, 69% believes that he would bring major change or tear down the system completely. Good luck sleeping tonight. If Joe Biden, here's the contrary. Joe Biden, in the same circumstance, Joe Biden, nothing would change, 33%. Minor changes, 35%. So you have this, I wouldn't say alarming, but glaring number of those who are calling for major change, either tearing the system down, major changes. 74% seek the major change, seek huge change of some sort. And yet, of that, not of the 74%, but of the same folks who were polled at 74% that are calling for major change or tearing the system down completely, 68% believe only minor changes or no changes would be made if Joe Biden were reelected. I mean, it's these to me are breadcrumbs. This is, if I'm on his staff, I'm looking within the meetings here and I'm saying, guys, do we need to start talking about major change? Do we need to, I don't know, maybe start listening to Bernie Sanders a little bit, maybe bring him in and start weighing some of these changes and look at what polls extremely well? Do you think the changes that Donald Trump would make would be good for the country or bad for the country? 31%, very good. 14%, somewhat good. That's not good. That's only 44% who think somewhat good. Do you think the changes Joe Biden would make would be good for the country or bad for the country or neither good nor bad? And see, this is where Joe Biden kind of gets a little bit of only 23% would be very good or somewhat good for the country. Dismal. Nothing would change, 33%. If you're just listening in, we are going through the New York Times Siena College poll, Georgia crosstab here. This is just Georgia. One of the, air quote, swing states. Although I would say that the 49-39 Trump v. Biden number in this poll would indicate that maybe Georgia's not the swing state we thought it was. I've been saying all along, it's not a purple state, it's a purple-red state. I'm going to describe two kinds of presidential candidates, a pollster would ask. Regardless of who you support, tell me which kind of candidate you'd prefer as president. 47% said that they would prefer a candidate who promises to bring politics in Washington back to normal. To normal! 47%, that leads. And yet the establishment incumbent president, who's been in Washington since 1972, the breadth of which his term, you would say, has been somewhat normal, trails. 47%, a candidate who promises to bring politics in Washington back to normal. 44% say a candidate who promises to fundamentally change America. 9% decided to take a pass on that question. How much attention would you say you are paying to news about the legal cases against Donald Trump? Some or a lot of attention gets 63%. 18% say, only a little bit. 17% say they aren't paying attention at all. 35% only paying a little attention or no attention at all. Most of Georgia's voters are paying attention. Whether they are cheering for him to come away scot-free or not, that's another question. Thinking about the trial of Donald Trump in New York related to hush money payments made to the porn star Stormy Daniels, do you think that it is likely or unlikely he will be convicted? Only 27% believe that he will be convicted. Somewhat likely or very likely. 27% of Georgia voters believe he will be convicted. No faith in the justice system there. There is a very to somewhat unlikely majority, 61% there. Thinking about Donald Trump's trial in New York related to hush money payments, do you think he will be able to get a fair and impartial trial? 52% said no. In the dispute between Israel and the Palestinian, which side do you sympathize with more, Israel or the Palestinians? 44%, overwhelmingly, 44% Israel, 19% Palestinians. You do have the 18% who say both equally. Okay. I don't know. I find that somewhat interesting. There is a empathetic plight for all involved. 18%, though. I guess when you add that to Israel, 18%, that's 62% for Israel or both, and only 37% for Palestinians or both. This is all fascinating. What single news source do you turn to most often? What do we get here? What leads the way? It looks like the nightly news still gets the lead there. National television networks, CBS, NBC, ABC. 9% as well, Fox News. CNN, 8%. 3% for MSNBC. Public radio, NPR, PBS, 5%. National print or online news organizations like the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, 6%. Does that say 21% social media? Wow. It does. Wow, 21% social media. These are new times we're living in, kids. 21% say social media. Wow. All right, so we have just a few more questions that we dive into here when we are pouring through the New York Times Siena College polling. I don't know about y'all, but this is a fascinating snapshot. We're looking at Georgia crosstabs. I will include the link to the crosstab. In fact, the entire poll, I'll have that for you in today's show notes at ronshowatl.com. And then the question I guess we could ask ourselves, how much do we pay attention to this stuff? Is polling really accurate anymore? I don't know. That and more when The Ron Show returns here. Thank you for listening on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, on demand at ProgressiveVoices.com, or wherever you podcast. This is The Ron Show. We're in the home stretch. Thanks for listening. I appreciate it. And you're just listening to me going over crosstabs of the New York Times Siena College poll. I don't know if this fascinates you. It fascinates me. You can dive into it yourself as well. I'll put it in the show notes at ronshowatl.com. I think I mentioned that just a few minutes ago. Follow the show, by the way, at ronshowatl on the Twitter X platform, Instagram, Facebook, Threads. I posted something on Threads over the weekend. Yes. What else are we learning about Georgia voters that we may not have known before, or that kind of gives us a little bit? 77% of those polled said that they do not participate in cryptocurrency. That's encouraging. No, seriously, I worry about the crypto people. Video games, not at all, 64%. What else do I want to see here? TikTok. How often, if ever, do you use TikTok? In the state of Georgia, 36% say never. Or rarely, 13%. So nearly half of those polled said they rarely or never. I'm kind of like that. People send me TikToks, and I like to watch them. They're funny. Don't usually make many TikToks. Let's see what else. Oh, the COVID vaccine. Didn't we see that here a minute ago? Oh yeah. Have you gotten any doses of a COVID-19 vaccine, including boosters? 54% said yes, multiple times. 18% just once. 72% of those in Georgia polled said that they got at least one COVID-19 vaccine. Are you or is any member of your household a member of a labor union? 89% no. And we wonder why the middle class has slowly eroded, disappearing. Okay, do you consider yourself to be politically liberal, moderate, or conservative? 35% moderate, 10% liberal, 10% very liberal. That is a 55%. And I think that sort of makes sense. You can see why Georgia has become a swing state. The somewhat conservative, very conservative is at 37%, which is, a 10%, or I'm sorry, 17% gulf between those who consider themselves somewhat to very liberal. So 37% consider themselves conservative, 20% liberal in some way, shape, form, or fashion. 35% of the state is like, could go either way. Which of the following general income categories, household income, the largest chunk, 50 to 100,000, 31%. 100,000 to 200,000, 25%. 23% of those polled make less than $50,000 a year. Scrolling down to religious affiliation, you get 34% Christian, 10% Catholic. Do I see Judaism here? Oh, yeah. Less than 1% Jewish, less than 0.5% Muslim, 24% no religious affiliation. Wow. Okay, so back to political affiliation. As of today, do you lean more toward the Democratic Party, 30%, Republican Party, 39%, 30% said, I don't know. When you combine the party identification and those who are leaning, 43%. This is razor thin here. 43% Democratic Party, 45% Republican Party, 13% go, neither. And to show you how long this poll must have taken these folks and how disinterested they are in talking, would you be open to commenting on the issues in this survey and be interested in being contacted by a reporter? 69% said no. So when it comes to discussing polling accuracy, all right, here's where I am on this at this point. 2016, we relied on flawed methodology. I say, flawed methodology, or at least a flaw in looking at national polling and ignoring the Electoral College. That's how we came up with, 98% of those polls back then said, well, Hillary Clinton's definitely going to win this thing. She did win the popular vote. They didn't factor in the Electoral College or breaking it down by states. We are at least seeing now, as evidenced by crosstabs in the swing states here, New York Times, Siena College, we're paying attention to swing states. Methodology now, that's another question. How reliable, how trustworthy can these polls be when you, again, we pointed out the age. Most of those polled were over the age of 45. Most voters, by the way, who show up to vote are also over the age of 45. And it could be noted that the young voter this year may be less interested than they have been in many years to vote because of dissatisfaction with the president's handling of the Israel-Gaza crisis. There seems to be a malaise or dissatisfaction of some sorts when it comes to student loan. It's harder than ever for a first-time home buyer to buy a home with interest rates being what they are. Again, the president has no control over that, and home prices skyrocketing. And you've heard me say this for weeks now. This is where a JFK moonshot by the end of the decade sort of, clarion call could be made and would see some movement on, I think, because it needs to be addressed. And like that, to me, that is like the one big political issue that neither candidate, neither party really seems to be talking about it. It's right there. It's waiting for someone. Justin Clowens at The Week wrote this in January. Does this mean that polls just aren't accurate? Not always, but they can present a different picture than reality. This is largely because the real margin of error is often about double the one reported. You scroll down to the same article, though, and it goes to the 2022 midterms. Polling during the 2022 midterms were historically accurate. 538 reported this is partially because pollsters began, quote, increasingly weighting surveys based on whom respondents recall voting for in a previous election, in addition to adjusting for standard demographics such as race and age. Well, this is where I come to the point where I see that my time is just about up. It's hard not to notice from all of the data we just poured over. And by the way, again, we'll include in the show notes at ronshowatl.com. The administration, the Democratic Party at the state level and the federal level has a lot of work to do, and maybe looking more at issues that the American voter don't see as important as they do. Things like the economy and inflation. And again, to me, the big one, this isn't even in the poll here. The cost of housing. It's a huge issue. That's going to do it for The Ron Show. Back here tomorrow, 9 to 10 a.m. on the American One Radio app, AmericanOneRadio.com. The replay 5 to 6 p.m. and on demand all day at ProgressiveVoices.com or wherever you podcast. Have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow.